Hello folks, this is Todd Hubbs, agricultural economist at the University of Illinois. Today I'm doing a Farm Minute farmdoc on my presentation from the 2019 Illinois Farm Economics Summit. As a disclaimer, if you get a hold of the writings I did for the Farm Economics Summit, they were done in late November due to publication issues. And between the time I wrote it and the time I talked about it, it looks like a trade deal went into place. So if you were at IFES, you saw some of this, but if not, I think this clarity is important. So let me get into it. We look like we got a trade deal in place. It's going to be signed on January 15th in D.C. And supposedly this trade deal is going to be maybe $16 billion above 2017 calendar year exports. And what you're seeing in this graph is what $24 billion worth of agricultural exports to China look like in 2017. As you notice, over half of it was soybeans, and we don't often think about forest products or fish products or things like hides and skins, but those were a huge portion of the dollar amount as well. When we think about for soybeans and corn in general, a trade deal will be a lot better for soybeans if China's buying a lot of beans. And that $152 million of corn was a little over 33 million bushels of corn. So we could see corn exports increase up to China's quota, which it looks like they're not going to violate, around 280 to 290 million bushels, which would be helpful considering how poor exports for corn have been thus far this marketing year. We could also see a little bit more ethanol than the 55 million gallons they did in 2017. If we could see them get back up to 200 million gallons or so, that would be helpful for corn as well. So when we think about $24 billion or maybe $40 billion of exports in this new trade deal, it's not all corn and bean stuff. I expect some real strong imports from China in the meat sector, which would be helpful for corn and beans as well. So let me get into the balance sheets that I presented in IFES. I showed USDA's current forecast, and we'll get some new numbers on Friday, January 10th. Then I have my forecast. Due to the livestock herd we had, I'm a little more bullish on feed and residual. Right now, with the kind of ethanol grind we got, USDA's projection's about right. And I'm a little bit more optimistic on exports in the second half of the marketing year, particularly if China comes in. We'll have to wait and see, but currently we're well behind USDA's pace of 1.85 billion bushels. The big question is just how much corn's out there. Right now, USDA has yield at 167 and harvested acreage at 81.8. In my models, I'm still a little bit below on the corn yield. I'm at 165.3, and I think we could lose a few acres of corn, harvested acres, particularly what happened in the northern corn belt through October and all the way through December. We'll see, and we'll find out on January 10th what USDA is going to say, and that'll go a long way to determine where price is going to be. So I've got a lower production level, which means a lower supply. I think a lot of the trade thinks they're only going to be about a bushel come out of the corn yield. We'll see. And I've got stronger feed and residual consumption and exports, so I've had a little bit stronger price, $3.95. That's a seasonal average price forecast for the country. Here in Illinois, on old crop prices, we're seeing some pretty strong basis, particularly through the January through March window, and we could see those prices. Those prices are higher, and I think we may be in a condition on old crop if the reports go our way and the trade deal actually does get finalized to where we're in a strengthening basis, strong futures prices scenario. The big question when we think about 2020, 2021 is just how many acres of corn are going to be planted. What I'm showing there is USDA's long-run forecast. They haven't produced a forecast for 2020, 2021 yet, and they won't until May. And there's mine. I have slightly fewer planted acres of corn at 92.1. But if the trade deal goes through and prices strengthen, we could see a lot of corn out there. It's sort of dependent on soybeans. The trade deal could help crops like cotton and sorghum and maybe bring some of those acres back from what we thought was going to be a pullback. I think you'll see a lot of corn acres next year, and there's a lot of risk in this trade deal. So when you're thinking about marketing old crop and new crop, think about the political risk involved this year and just how sensitive this trade deal might be. If we see some really strong harvest prices, putting a floor under some of those prices in this early pre-harvest marketing window might be a good idea. For soybeans, much like for corn, I've got production a little bit lower than USDA does. Now, I think that yield might be a little low. I think the trade's thinking around 46.2, somewhere in that range, maybe a little higher. These are what my models are saying. I've got a little bit of harvested acreage come out of it, but it's not a huge drop in production. I think crush is basically on pace for 2105. We'll see how it goes for the rest of the marketing year. Exports, this is the big question. We're actually behind export pace and total commitments for soybeans, despite China buying quite a few more beans than they did last year, thus far in the marketing year. I think if you see some really strong Chinese buying out of this trade deal, that number could go up, but I'm not sure we should expect miracles. It's important to remember this trade deal is over a calendar year, so if they buy beans for 2020 and the 2021 marketing year, in 2020, it counts. It counts as money spent on bean export purchases. As we start to get into planting season, how many acres are we going to see? I doubt we plant 76.5 million acres again. The probability of having the kind of prevent plant that allowed us to set aside 12.5 million acres of beans is a pretty low probability event in 2020. Right now, I'm at about 85.4 million acres of beans planted. But if bean prices are strong and the trade deal looks like it's holding, you could see a lot more bean acres than that planted in 2020. And that's going to put pressure on harvest price and possibly basis. So much like with corn, old crops in sort of a possible strengthening basis, futures moving up kind of scenario. With the new crop, maybe futures going down in a weakening basis, so putting a floor under some of that after these reports come out and we see what kind of price reaction we get can mitigate some of that political risk. The positive for all this is if everything comes according to plan and production goes down in both and the trade deal goes into place and we see China starting to buy in a good pace, I think we could see some pretty good crop insurance prices in February, which will help mitigate some risk. But I think putting a floor under some of that 2020 crop is a good idea this year. Well, I'd like to thank you for your time.